any way you slice it at this point, President Donald Trump's reelection bid is not in great shape, amid racial unrest, a public health pandemic, an economy that again, as we found out this week, has been in a recession since the end of February. Trump's approval rating has sunk into the low 40s. Some polls even have it below 40 at this point. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has established a lead of about 8 points in the national polling average. And Trump is also trailing in polling averages in most of the key battleground states as well. But of course, if the past 4 years and 2020 in particular have taught us anything, it's that a lot can change in the course of just a few days, let alone a few months. Remember when Joe Biden lost Iowa and New Hampshire badly and we were all writing off his campaign, or when President Trump was impeached and we thought that would be driving the campaign? Those are all distant memories at this point. So I guess the question right now is this moment that we are in right now, is it just, kind of nothing more than a low point for Trump that he can eventually rebound from? Or has the race really fundamentally changed? One that everyone expected to be, kind of a razor thin, really tight race, have all of these sort of outside events really structurally change the course of things. Dave, you and Alex spoke to a lot of smart strategists from both parties this week. What did they tell you kind of about this moment that we're in right now?
Well, look, we can't predict the future. None of these dozen plus strategists we talk to can predict the future. But the moment we're in right now, this is a fundamentally different race than it was even a month ago, really, and certainly going back to February. You look at the national lead that Biden has been able to establish. It is at about 8 points, and that is basically a parallel to the margin that Barack Obama won his first election, which was an electoral college route. I mean, people forget it wasn't a close rate. It was close margins in a lot of states, but it was an electoral college route. And that's what Robert Gibbs sort of used as the comparison. Now, of course, 1,000 things could change between now and election day. We've got to put caveats on all this stuff. But as political reporters, we are here to analyze and report on what is going on in this moment and time, not to say what's going to happen on October 30th or 20th. Tons of things can happen. And we're not saying Trump can't win. Of course not. But what we're saying is it looks really, really bad. And he's probably in the worst position now than he has been in his entire presidency. I mean, some people make the comparison to Charlottesville as a low point. And I heard that come up in a lot of conversations, and I think Alex did as well, as a low point. I mean, his approval rating has dropped 10 points within a month. He's down to 39%. Approval, 70% of the country thinks we're on the wrong track. That's a staggering number for him to face. And then just, nerding out in the battleground states, he's behind in 5 of the 6 key core states that almost every strategist points to, them being Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona. You get some debates about exactly how far he's behind. But even when you talk to Trump folks, they can't emphatically say he's ahead anywhere. They just say their argument is he'll come back. The election isn't today. He's getting a ton of bad news right now. It's a tough time to be an incumbent. But as he did against Hillary Clinton, he was down in all these polls then. He has time to come back. But that is their best explanation, which isn't a prime explanation, I think.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, obviously, we focus on the top line numbers of a lot of these polls, but you look into the fundamentals as well. And there just aren't a lot of bright spots for the president at this point in time. Michael, you're obviously fairly plugged in with the White House and folks over there. How are they, feeling about their standing in this race right now?
Yeah. And I think the way that you frame it is perfect, because we have seen so many different times the president rebound from these, seemingly intractable crises, right? The Mueller investigation, which nobody remembers, the impeachment saga, which nobody remembers. And yet this time, the people who are taking the hit to the president's polling most seriously are the president himself and his team, right? And they're not acting like it's part of an ebb and flow, because they're considering structural changes within the campaign, right, to leadership and so on. And that to me is a clear indication of how seriously they're taking this and how genuinely they are worried. And Dave wrote in his most recent piece, which I highly recommend, what is undeniable, which is that Trump is on defense in virtually every state in play, those core states. And obviously, the closer we get to the election, the harder it's going to be to turn things around. They're simply running out of time, right? One of the greatest differences between all of those other major, existential crises that the president has faced is we're running out of time, right? We're less than 5 months away. And so, now the president faces challenges across the line, with core-based demographic groups, right? With even evangelicals, the elderly, even independents. Right. And he's taking boldly transparent efforts to shore up those bases of support, right? Moving, I think it was last week, to slash out-of-pocket costs for insulin, which is really important to elderly voters. Obviously, that stunt outside of St. John's Church, which backfired spectacularly during the protests with the holding up the Bible outside Lafayette Square. One thing I think is important to note is that there are folks within the Trump orbit who think that there's an opportunity here to divide the Democrats on the question of defunding the police. Obviously, they're hammering that home. But there is a bit of a sense of if you had a Teflon Don in 2016, there's a sense of a Teflon Joe a little bit, because these attacks on, his family ties to China have fallen flat. The Tara Reade accusations have not borne out through, reporting. His record on crime is not sticking, and even the attacks on his forgetfulness don't seem to actually be sticking among Democratic voters. All of which is ironic, coming from the Trump campaign, given what they were able to survive in 2016. So I think that what they're hoping for is to sustain or further erode what they view to be, weak enthusiasm numbers for Biden, by disincentivizing activists from supporting him. But I just don't know how effective that's going to be at this point.
Right, and to your point, Michael, which Dave and Alex wrote about in their piece, I mean, part of the problem for Trump is that they haven't been able to find that one attack that's really worked against Joe Biden. And, because one of the big advantages the president has had this whole campaign was his massive war chest, and he still holds a big financial advantage over Joe Biden. And they really started to unleash that barrage of ads last month, but the numbers haven't really moved. Dave, how can, what can the Trump campaign do to try and kind of turn this into more of a choice between Trump and Biden, rather than, right now it's really shaping up as a referendum to, how is the president handling the economy? How is he handling coronavirus? How is he handling this racial unrest and, criminal justice reform and all these other issues that are, dominating the spotlight right now?
Yeah, so they basically had a month where they unleashed the China attack on Biden nationally and in the key battleground states. The main message and images people were seeing was that basically Biden was a pawn of China. He gave them all they wanted, and that helped hollow out manufacturing jobs in these states. Also with some slices about Hunter Biden using his access, to get wealthy. Which is another name that we thought was going to be prominent in this election cycle, Hunter Biden, which just hasn't stuck. So you had basically May into June where the Trump campaign tried this, didn't work. Obviously, there were intervening events that obviously superseded everything else going on. But now we just seen this week the Trump campaign roll out a new ad with Biden basically trying to tie Biden to Antifa, and using the images of protests, the more extreme protesters around the country, exhibiting some violence, and then layering Biden kneeling with a mask on. And, to me, it seems like quite a reach, because, as we well know, we covered the Democratic primary, all of us, Biden is not seen as an extreme figure. He was seen as the most moderate, safe, reassuring figure, to some consternation among Democrats, right? Like, a lot of Democrats wanted someone, tougher and more to the left. Biden just isn't that figure. But there is some data that the Trump allies, I will say the super PAC in particular, said Biden is not defined as you guys think he is with most voters, that most people just know him as Obama's vice president and the guy who beat Bernie. Mm-hmm. And if you're a younger voter, you don't know his record. Now, if you're an older voter, he's been around forever. But they believe, and a lot of this is going to be whether they can depress turnout. Can they depress younger people? Can they disincentivize younger people from coming out and voting for Joe Biden? David Plouffe has said, I know on his podcast, the only way Trump can really win some of the battleground states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, is if he props up a third party candidate, right? The Gary Johnson, Jill Stein. Neither of them are running this year. You don't have a recognizable name. And recognizable, I just mean getting, 2%, 3% to peel off. Yeah. They're not there. So Trump's got that problem as well, that he doesn't have help, drawing, at least yet, from an ability to sort of a protest vote to pull Biden's number down, to be able to win a state with 46, 47%. And that's sort of an ancillary issue that mm-hmm. I think the Trump campaign has to deal with. But I think they're going to be in teardown mode for the next couple months. It will be interesting to see their summer strategy. But based on that ad that they unleashed this week, their brand new ad, they're going to go tough on law and order, and they're going to try to make trying to transform Joe Biden into a member of Antifa. Is quite a reach, but maybe their best one right now.